Imagine standing in your wedding dress, minutes away from walking down the aisle, and your father tells you he won't give you away because your sister doesn't like it. That was my reality. My name is Clara Whitfield, and for as long as I can remember, my family has had a way of making me feel like the second choice. I never wanted to believe it was intentional, but deep down, I always knew. My father, Thomas, was a man who believed that keeping the peace meant letting my sister have her way. My mother, Margaret, rarely questioned him. And my sister, Elena, the so-called golden child, thrived in that environment. Growing up, Elena was the one who got the praise, the attention, the easier path. She was the one my father bragged about, the one my mother shielded, the one who never had to fight for a place at the table. I learned early on that if Elena wanted something, I might as well step back. That was just how things were in our household. I swallowed a lot of feelings to keep things calm, and for years I convinced myself that it didn't matter. Then there was David. David Cross was nothing like my family. He met me when I was at my most uncertain, unsure if I was ever going to matter to anyone. From the start, he treated me like I was enough, like I didn't need to prove myself to deserve love and respect. He didn't question my independence, didn't try to control me, and didn't make me feel small. He was steady and kind, and when he asked me to marry him, I didn't hesitate. For the first time in my life, I was sure of something. When I told my family about the engagement, the reactions were exactly what I should have expected, but still secretly hoped would be different. My mother smiled politely, my father nodded like it was just another piece of news, and Elena smirked as if she was waiting to deliver the first jab. But I ignored it. I told myself none of it mattered, because David and I were building something that was ours, something they couldn't take away. Still, I wanted one thing from them. Just one. I wanted my father to walk me down the aisle. I had pictured it since I was a little girl, not because I thought he had been the perfect dad, but because that moment was supposed to mean something. It was supposed to show that despite everything, despite all the years of being overlooked, I was still his daughter. I was still worth that walk. I didn't ask him for much in life, but this was the one thing I wanted. The closer the wedding came, the more I held on to that image of him taking my arm and walking me toward David. For once, I wanted to feel like the center of the family's attention, like I wasn't living in Elena's shadow. But even then, somewhere deep down, a part of me worried. A part of me whispered that when the time came, my father would find a way to choose Elena again. I tried to push it down, telling myself I was being paranoid. I told myself this time would be different. I couldn't have been more wrong. Growing up in our house was like living in someone else's shadow every single day. If Elena wanted something, she got it. If I wanted the same thing, I was told to be reasonable, to wait, to let her go first. It wasn't just about toys or clothes when we were little. It became a pattern that seeped into every part of our lives. She picked the family vacation spots, she chose the restaurants, and even when it came to birthdays, somehow Elena's day was brighter and more celebrated than mine. I remember once when I was about 10, I wanted a bike. I had been saving coins and small bills from birthdays and little chores, and I told my parents how excited I was. Elena heard me, and suddenly she wanted a bike too. My father didn't think twice. Elena got the newest, nicest model right away, and I was given her old one, the one she didn't want anymore. My parents said it was fair, that we both had bikes now. But I knew it wasn't the same. That kind of thing happened so often that after a while, I stopped asking. Elena grew up believing the world would always bend for her. My parents made sure of it. If she had a bad day at school, the whole house adjusted itself to her mood. If she wanted quiet, I was told to keep it down. If she didn't want to share, I was told to understand her feelings. I learned how to shrink myself just to keep things peaceful. I was never the type to fight or shout. I figured it wasn't worth it because in the end, they were going to take her side anyway. So I stayed quiet, and my silence became the role I played in the family. The quiet daughter. The reasonable one. The one who didn't cause trouble. I told myself that maybe that was its own kind of value, even though deep down it hurt to feel invisible. And yet, even with all the years of being overlooked, I still carried this one hope with me. I held on to the thought of my father walking me down the aisle one day. It wasn't about fairy tales or trying to rewrite the past. It was about having one moment, just one, where I wasn't second best. I wanted to believe that when that day came, he would look at me and see his daughter first, not just the other child after Elena. That thought carried me through so many small heartbreaks growing up. Every time Elena got the spotlight, I told myself my time would come. Every time I swallowed my feelings, I imagined a future where my father's arm was linked with mine, and the rest of the world didn't matter. It was such a simple picture, but it meant everything to me. Even as I grew older and learned to accept how things were, I never let go of that one dream. It was the one tradition that felt sacred to me, the one place where I thought I would finally be chosen. When David asked me to marry him, it was one of the happiest moments of my life. He had planned it in the most thoughtful way, nothing over the top, just something that felt like us. There was no hesitation in me, no second thoughts. I knew what I wanted, and I wanted him. For once, I felt like my life was truly my own, like I wasn't competing with anyone for approval. When I told my family, I wanted to believe they would share in my happiness. I imagined my mother tearing up, my father patting David on the back, maybe even Elena smiling for once instead of smirking. But reality came quickly, and it didn't look like that at all. I gathered them in the living room one evening, still glowing from the excitement of it all. I showed them my ring, and before I could finish explaining how he had proposed, Elena leaned back on the couch, crossed her arms, and said, "Finally someone settled for you." The words hit like ice water poured over me. She said it with a little laugh, like it was a harmless joke, but I knew better. She always knew how to cut me down with a smile. I looked at my parents, expecting them to at least correct her, to remind her it wasn't the time for remarks like that. But my father only asked David a few polite questions about his job, and my mother made a comment about how weddings were expensive these days. No real joy, no real excitement. It was as if I had told them we were buying a new sofa, not planning a marriage. But when Elena began talking about her own future plans, how she might move to a bigger city, how she had someone promising in her life, suddenly the energy shifted. My father's eyes lit up, my mother leaned in with interest, and the room felt alive in a way it hadn't when I was speaking. They asked Elena questions, encouraged her ideas, laughed at her little stories. It was like my announcement had been nothing more than a warm-up for whatever Elena wanted to talk about. I sat there, trying not to let the sting show on my face. David held my hand under the table, giving it a little squeeze, and I knew he saw everything I was trying to hide. I smiled when I was supposed to, nodded at the right times, and told myself not to let it ruin anything. This was our moment, not theirs. Inside, though, I felt that old ache, the same one I had felt as a child whenever Elena got the praise and I was left standing on the side. I reminded myself that I had David now, that I was starting my own life, and that their approval wasn't what defined me. But even with all that, I couldn't shake the quiet sadness that came with realizing that my family would never really see me the way I hoped they would. Still, I pushed it aside. I told myself I wasn't going to let their indifference ruin what David and I had. I wanted to focus on the joy of planning a wedding, on building a future with him. If I kept looking at them for excitement, I'd only end up disappointed again. So I brushed it off, or at least I tried to. This was my happiness, and I wasn't going to let them take it away. The planning should have been exciting. I had dreamed of the little details, flowers, colors, the dress, all the small choices that made the day mine. But almost as soon as we started, Elena pushed herself into every decision. She spoke like it was her right, like she knew better than me, and my parents encouraged her instead of stopping her. It started with the flowers. I had chosen soft colors, something simple and elegant, and I was proud of the choice. Elena wrinkled her nose when she saw the samples. "These look dull," she said, picking up one of the arrangements. "You need something brighter, something people will actually notice. No one's going to remember these." I tried to explain that it was the look I wanted, but she waved me off and told my mother how she could call a florist she knew. My mother nodded, saying maybe Elena was right. My father stayed quiet, which was his way of agreeing without saying it aloud. Then came my dress. I loved it the second I tried it on. It wasn't flashy, but it made me feel beautiful and comfortable in my own skin. When Elena saw it, she tilted her head and smiled that smile she always wore before saying something cruel. "It's nice," she said slowly, "but don't you think it's a little plain? I mean, it's your wedding. Shouldn't you wear something that actually stands out?" She offered to take me shopping with her, as if I hadn't thought it through on my own. My mother chimed in, saying, "Maybe just look at a few more options, Clara. No harm in it." I felt the sting again, the same old suggestion that my choices weren't good enough unless Elena approved. The worst came when Elena suggested I move the date. She claimed she had a work conference around that time, and it would be unfair if she couldn't fully enjoy the wedding. She said it casually, but I knew she was testing how far she could push. I told her I wasn't changing the date. My father frowned, saying, "Don't be so stubborn. It's just a date, Clara. Your sister only wants to be part of your big day." My mother agreed, reminding me that keeping peace in the family was important. I stood my ground, but inside I felt small, like no matter what I chose, it would never be respected. Through all of this, David stayed beside me. He didn't try to take over, didn't argue with my family on my behalf, but he made it clear he was there for me. Whenever I came home upset after another round of Elena's interference, he listened. He'd wrap his arm around me, remind me that the wedding was about us, not them. Sometimes he'd joke to make me smile. Sometimes he'd just sit quietly and let me lean on him. He gave me space to handle it in my own way, but never let me feel alone. Even with his support, I felt myself growing tired. Every choice turned into a debate. Every plan became a chance for Elena to insert herself. My parents called it keeping peace, but it only ever meant bending to Elena's will. I told myself over and over that it didn't matter, that at the end of it I'd still marry David. But deep down, I wondered how much more I would have to swallow before my own wedding stopped feeling like it belonged to me. The morning of my wedding was filled with nerves and excitement. I slipped into my dress, the one I had chosen despite Elena's criticism, and for a moment I felt everything fall into place. The air smelled of flowers, guests were arriving, and I could hear the music being tested in the distance. I told myself that no matter what had happened during the planning, this day was finally mine. Just as I was preparing to take my place before the ceremony began, my father came to find me. At first, I thought he was there to reassure me, to say something kind before walking me down the aisle. He looked uncomfortable, shifting from one foot to the other, avoiding my eyes. Then he cleared his throat and said words that I'll never forget. "Clara," he began quietly, "I can't walk you down the aisle." At first, I thought he was joking. I laughed nervously and waited for him to explain. But he didn't laugh. He kept his hands tucked behind his back and said, "Elena feels uncomfortable. She thinks it'll make her feel left out if I do this for you." The room spun around me. I stared at him, waiting for him to take it back, waiting for him to say he didn't mean it. But his face was serious, his voice steady. My heart dropped into my stomach, and all I could manage to say was, "You're serious?" He nodded like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. "It's just easier this way. You don't want tension at your wedding, do you? Elena wouldn't feel right about it, and I don't want her upset." My hands shook, and I pressed them against the fabric of my dress to steady myself. I had dreamed about this one moment my whole life, holding on to the thought that he would be there by my side, even when nothing else had ever been equal. And now, minutes before the ceremony, he was telling me that even here, even now, Elena came first. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that on the one day that was supposed to be about me, my father chose her feelings over mine. The humiliation burned in my chest, the heartbreak heavy and sharp. It wasn't just about walking down the aisle anymore. It was about a lifetime of being overlooked, of never being enough, all leading to this moment where my father confirmed it without hesitation. I wanted to scream, to demand how he could do this to me. But the words stuck in my throat. I knew that if I broke down now, if I let myself fall apart, it would ruin everything I had worked for, everything David and I had planned. So I swallowed the pain, forcing myself to stand tall even as my chest ached. "Fine," I whispered, because it was the only word I could get out. My father nodded, as if it was settled, and walked away without looking back. The silence that followed was louder than any words he could have spoken. In that moment, I realized something that cut deeper than anything Elena had ever said to me. My father hadn't just chosen her over me. He had made it clear that I would never come first, not even on the day I became a bride. The music began to play, the kind that makes everyone turn their heads toward the entrance. I stood there, clutching my bouquet, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away before I even took a step. For a moment, I hesitated, staring at the space beside me that should have been filled by my father. I felt the weight of it pressing down, heavier than the dress, heavier than all the years of silence I had carried. But I straightened my back and took the first step on my own. Each movement felt louder than the music, like the sound of my shoes against the floor echoed through the room. I saw the faces of guests turn toward me, and then I saw the flicker of surprise when they realized I was walking alone. Whispers spread through the crowd, soft but sharp, the kind of murmurs that pricked at the skin even if I couldn't hear the exact words. I kept going, forcing myself not to look around, not to search for my father's face in the crowd. If I did, I was afraid I would crumble right there. My chest tightened with every step, and I had to swallow hard to keep from breaking down. This was supposed to be a moment of pride, a moment of joy, but instead it felt like I was dragging the weight of years of neglect down that aisle with me. Still, I told myself I wouldn't let them win. Not Elena, who sat with her head held high like she had claimed a victory. Not my father, who had chosen her comfort over my happiness. They weren't going to take this away from me. This was my wedding, and if I had to walk every step by myself, then that was what I would do. As I reached the front, my eyes locked on David. He was waiting there, his expression soft but filled with something that steadied me. When I finally reached him, he took my hands in his without hesitation. The strength in his grip told me he understood everything I wasn't saying. "You don't need them," he whispered, his voice low enough for only me to hear. "You've got me." Those words melted some of the ice that had built in my chest. In that moment, the sting of humiliation didn't disappear, but it eased just enough for me to breathe again. I looked at him, at the man who had chosen me without question, without conditions, and I knew he was right. The ceremony moved forward, the vows, the promises, the exchange of rings. I said the words with a shaky voice, but they carried truth in them. Every time I glanced at David, I felt a little stronger, like I could push the pain aside long enough to get through this. I had walked alone, and it had nearly broken me. But standing there with David's hands wrapped around mine, I understood something important. My father and sister hadn't destroyed me, even though they tried. I had made it to the end of that aisle, and I wasn't alone anymore. The ceremony ended, and soon after we moved into the reception. The music played, the tables were set beautifully, and laughter filled the room. On the surface, it looked like the perfect celebration. But for me, there was a shadow over everything. I could feel it in the way people's eyes lingered on me a second too long, in the hushed voices at tables where guests leaned in close to each other. They all knew something wasn't right. They had seen me walk down the aisle alone, and they were trying to piece together why. My father sat at a table, eating and chatting like nothing unusual had happened. He smiled at relatives, clinked glasses when someone toasted, and acted as though he hadn't left me standing alone at the most important moment of my life. I watched him laugh with people, and every sound of it made me feel sick. It was as if he had erased what he had done, as if he believed that ignoring it meant it didn't matter. Elena was worse. She floated around the room in her dress like she was the guest of honor. She took credit for decorations she had helped choose, drew people into conversations, and smiled knowingly whenever someone's gaze flicked toward me. There was a smugness in her eyes, like she had won some private game that no one else even realized they were watching. She thrived on the attention, feeding on it while I tried to hold myself together. Everywhere I turned, I caught whispers. Guests pretending to compliment the food or the music while lowering their voices to discuss what had really happened. I didn't need to hear the words to know the questions. Why hadn't my father walked me down the aisle? Why had I been left alone on a day meant to celebrate love and family? Their pity clung to me heavier than the fabric of my gown. I tried to smile, to laugh when spoken to, but inside I was unraveling. My chest hurt with every glance in Elena's direction, with every sight of my father pretending that everything was fine. I wanted to scream at them both, to demand why my happiness was never enough. But I didn't. I couldn't. If I let them see me break, they would win again. So instead, I sat quietly at my table, sipping water I couldn't taste, and I began to think. The pain inside me burned too strong to ignore, and with it came something sharper, something colder. I realized I couldn't let this go. Not this time. This wasn't just about being overlooked like when I was a child, or ignored like when Elena wanted the spotlight. This was my wedding day, the one day that should have been mine, and they had taken it from me without shame. I looked around at the faces of people who mattered. David's family, my friends, people who celebrated me without hesitation. I thought about the difference between their warmth and my own family's betrayal. And in that moment, a decision settled in me. This betrayal would not go unanswered. I wouldn't fight them with shouting or arguments. That wasn't my way. But I would make sure they felt the weight of what they had done. Quietly, I began to plan. My revenge wouldn't be loud, but it would be lasting. And for the first time that day, the ache in my chest eased just a little, replaced by a steady resolve. After the wedding, I pulled back from my family completely. I didn't call, I didn't visit, and I didn't make excuses. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about it. I had spent years bending, shrinking, and staying quiet, but I was done with that. The silence was my choice now, and it gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt before. Weeks turned into months, and my parents made small attempts to reach out. A short message here, a polite check-in there. But I didn't respond. When my mother called, I let it go to voicemail. When my father asked through relatives if I was coming to a family dinner, I stayed home with David instead. The distance between us grew wider with each passing day, and I let it. Then one afternoon, Elena called me. Her voice was sweet, practiced, the kind of tone she used when she wanted something. She told me she was engaged, that she had found the person she wanted to marry. Without missing a beat, she said, "I want you to be my maid of honor. It would mean so much to me." For a second, I was stunned at her boldness. After everything she had done, after the way she had smiled while I walked down the aisle alone, she thought I would stand beside her on her wedding day. My answer was calm, steady, and colder than I think she expected. "No, Elena. I won't." She laughed nervously, trying to play it off. "Oh, come on, don't be like that. It's tradition. Sisters always stand by each other." I didn't raise my voice, but I didn't soften it either. "You made sure I stood alone on my day. You don't get to ask me for this." Then I ended the call. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself to her. Not long after, my father reached out. He spoke as if nothing had happened, as though the past could be brushed aside with a simple request. He reminded me that Elena's wedding would be expensive, that family was supposed to help, and since David and I were doing well financially, we could ease some of the burden. I listened quietly, waiting for him to finish. When he was done, I said, "No, I'm not paying for her wedding." His silence on the other end of the line told me he hadn't expected that. He started to argue, saying it was my responsibility as a sister, that it would show goodwill, that it would keep the peace. But I didn't waver. Instead of pouring money into Elena's wedding, I put it into my own life with David. We invested in our home, in plans for the future, in things that mattered to us. Every choice I made for myself felt like another step away from the hold they once had over me. The more distance I created, the clearer things became. I didn't owe them anything. Not my time, not my energy, not my money. They had made their choices, and now I was making mine. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was the beginning of something stronger than anger. It was the beginning of freedom. Elena's wedding day arrived, and despite everything, I decided to attend. Not for her, and not for my father, but because I wanted to prove to myself that I could stand in the same room with them and no longer feel small. I didn't sit in the family section. Instead, I stayed close to David and his parents, people who treated me like I belonged without conditions. The ceremony was beautiful in the way expensive weddings often are. Grand decorations, flawless details, and every guest dressed in their best. Elena shone in her gown, basking in the attention she had always craved. My father stood at her side, his arm linked proudly with hers, beaming as though this was the moment he had been waiting for his whole life. When the music started and Elena began her walk down the aisle, Thomas walked tall, proud to be the one escorting her. Guests smiled and whispered, admiring the picture they made together. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap, my face calm even though my chest tightened at the sight. It was the walk I had once dreamed of, the one he had denied me. But then something shifted. As Elena passed by, her eyes darted toward me for a moment, quick and sharp, as if checking to see if I was watching. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I simply held my head high, my back straight, showing no sign of the pain she expected. That was when the guests noticed something else. While Thomas walked Elena down the aisle, I wasn't sitting alone. Around me were David, his parents, and friends who had embraced me fully into their lives. They leaned close, smiled warmly, and treated me like family in ways my own blood never had. Their presence was loud without saying a word. I could feel eyes shifting back and forth, from Elena with my father to me with the people who loved me. The contrast was undeniable. On one side was a bride who demanded the spotlight, who took and took until nothing was left for anyone else. On the other side was me, quiet but steady, surrounded by genuine care and loyalty that couldn't be forced. And in the middle of it all was my father. I caught him glance my way as he walked Elena down the aisle, his smile faltering just slightly when he saw me sitting there, strong and unbroken. For the first time, I saw something in his expression that looked almost like doubt, almost like regret. He had chosen Elena over me so many times, but now the choice was clear to everyone. He had given away a daughter who had built her own happiness, who had found strength and love outside of his approval. In return, he clung to a daughter who saw family as a stage, who measured her worth by how much attention she could steal. I didn't need to say a word. my silence, my calm, and the people around me spoke louder than anything I could have shouted. And as my father reached the end of the aisle with Elena on his arm, I knew he finally saw the truth. He had traded something real for something empty, and the weight of that choice now belonged to him, not me. Years passed, and life moved on. David and I built a home together, filled it with laughter and love, and made a life that felt whole. I didn't look back much. My family became like a distant memory, one I no longer chased. Elena's calls grew fewer, and eventually they stopped altogether. She had moved away, chasing her own ambitions, and from what I heard through relatives, she barely stayed in touch with our parents. It wasn't surprising. Elena had always cared more about herself than anyone else. One afternoon, my father called. His voice sounded older, thinner, not as strong as I remembered. He asked to meet, and against my instincts, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe, and when I walked in, I saw him already seated, his hands folded tightly on the table. For the first time, he didn't look certain. He looked tired, weighed down by something I couldn't quite name. He started slowly, talking about Elena, about how she had left, how he rarely heard from her anymore. He admitted he thought she would always be close, that she would care for them as they grew older. But now he realized she had built her life elsewhere, far from them. He shifted uncomfortably, and then tried to soften his voice. "Clara," he said, "I miss you. I'd like us to have a relationship again." I listened, calm and steady, my hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee. The old ache stirred for a moment, but it didn't control me anymore. I had lived too much, grown too much, to fall back into needing his approval. When he finished, I met his eyes. My voice didn't shake. "You gave me away long before I asked you to walk me down the aisle." The words landed heavy between us. His shoulders slumped, and I saw something flicker across his face. Regret, guilt, maybe even shame. He didn't argue. He didn't try to defend himself this time. He just sat there, staring down at his hands as though the truth had finally caught up to him. I stood, placing my cup down gently. "I'm not angry anymore," I said. "But I'm not coming back either." I walked out of that cafe without looking behind me, not bitter, not broken, but free. The air outside felt lighter, and as I breathed it in, I realized the revenge I had been waiting for wasn't about harsh words or dramatic scenes. It was this, the quiet strength of living my life without them, of finding happiness they could never touch. My father would carry the weight of his choices now, not me. I went home to David, to the life we had built together, and I didn't feel the need to tell him everything that had been said. It was done. My father's regret belonged to him, and my peace belonged to me. That was the final blow, and it was enough.